Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. No matter where you are in the world, we're delighted to welcome all of you to this 2020 Stakeholder Association meeting of the TB Alliance. My name is Mitchell Warren. I'm the Executive Director of AVAC, as well as the President of the Stakeholder Association. And I am so happy to welcome you on behalf of Paul Sommerfeld, who is the Association Secretary, and along with me, works with all of you and the TB Alliance as the longest standing advisory group to the Alliance. And as you can see on this opening slide, it is not just the year 2020, it's actually the 20th anniversary of the Stakeholder Association and of the TB Alliance. There's a long history and somewhat unprecedented times at the same time. As many of you know, and you can see on the screen here, the diversity and robust membership of the Stakeholder Association. And I think all of us look forward to the annual meeting when historically we have been together on the margins of the Union Conference. And you don't need me to tell you that this is a year unlike any others, and I think it's safe to say in any of our memories. We have all been challenged. We are all juggling many different things in ways that no one could have imagined this year would hold. And yet it's still important that we gather here as a stakeholder association, even though we do it virtually, to review progress, to review new challenges that we face with a legendary infectious disease and tuberculosis, as well as we grapple with the newest pandemic to find its way in our lives. One of the things that I think anyone who's been involved in the TB Alliance and in the Stakeholder Association knows is that while we grapple with so many aspects in infectious disease, that science and research and development are critical components of a comprehensive response in any pandemic, epidemic, or infectious disease. And we've learned that perhaps best of all in tuberculosis, and we didn't need SARS-CoV-2, the newest novel coronavirus, to remind us of that fundamental importance of science and R&D, and yet it unfolds at remarkable speed. We were talking with the TB Alliance recently about what a remarkable period this is, unprecedented and devastating in many respects, but also an unprecedented underscoring of the value and importance of science. And that's really what brings us here to get an update on that. But as you all know, science and R&D don't happen simply in laboratories and in clinical trials. It takes large communities of stakeholders of all types to collaborate, to engage, to challenge each other in a response that is human rights-based as well as evidence-based. And that is certainly what the TB Alliance has sought to do in its history, and it's what the Stakeholder Association seeks to do here. It's obviously impossible not to think about COVID-19 in every conversation, whether you work in global health, as all of us do, or if you are just a non-scientist, non-community activist involved in global health. I'm struck by the way conversations of things that we've talked about in terms of clinical trials, in terms of access of new interventions, are now absolutely mainstream in every newspaper, in every community radio program, in every conversation around the world. So we come at a unique time with huge challenges, but really unique opportunities. As you'll see on this next slide, here's our run of show for today. We have a lot to cover, and we want to make sure we particularly have time for the conversation at the end. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce Nick Herbert, Lord Herbert of South Downs in the UK, to provide a keynote address. Then turn it over to three of the TB Alliance's leaders, Mel Spiegelman, who you all know, who will pick up and talk about the state of the TB Alliance as its president and chief executive officer. And then Eugene Sun and Nader Fatui will talk about innovations in TB R&D as leaders of the scientific program. And then I'll come back and moderate a discussion with three terrific people who are involved in both the delivery and in the receipt of TB programs and TB activities. And I'll introduce them as we join. You know, we talk a lot about stakeholder engagement. It often means community and civil society working with product developers, with researchers, with scientists. But money matters. We saw that with COVID. We've seen absolutely breathtaking speed when finances are put to an R&D challenge, as it has been. And we sit here now on a Thursday where it seems like every week, at least in the last 2 weeks, we've seen a cascade of very exciting positive news in COVID vaccine development. It took great science. It took a lot of money. It also takes political leadership. We have seen political leadership do remarkable things in the TB response. We've seen it do remarkable things in HIV, and I'd argue we've seen it in some places do remarkable things in the COVID response. We've also seen the absence of political leadership challenge responses, and we see it in many parts of the world, and certainly we have seen it in this country, in the United States, where I sit, where we are challenged to have a response that does follow the science and follow the evidence. So we're delighted in that vein to have Lord Herbert, a member of the House of Lords in the UK Parliament, previously a parliamentarian in the House of Commons in the UK, who's also been the leader and chair of the Global TB Caucus. We're so happy because you have demonstrated the absolute essential role that political leadership matters, that political leaders who follow the science are ones that will help us bridge communities and science and have a comprehensive response. So it's with great pleasure, Lord Herbert, that I welcome you to the Stakeholder Association and turn over this rather virtual floor to you.
Well, thank you, Mitchell, very much indeed for that kind introduction. And I'm honored to be invited to join your meeting and to deliver the opening few words. I'm speaking from the House of Lords in the UK Parliament. Here, very few members of Parliament are present, very few peers are present. It's a sign of the times that we are in, the unusual times that, Mitchell, you spoke of, and yet the challenges that face every nation have never been greater. I'm particularly pleased to be able to join the TB Alliance. You are such an important organization dedicated to the search for better drugs to fight TB, which we all know will be essential if we're to beat this disease. It's sad to reflect that a year ago, we were all meeting in person at various events. The Stop TB Partnership was being held in Jakarta, and we were then still full of so much optimism. It was then just 1 year on from the UN high-level meeting in New York, where the declaration had been agreed by every nation to step up the fight against tuberculosis, because we knew that we were off target when it came to beating this disease. And really important commitments were made to accelerate progress, not least in the vital area of research and development, where it was pledged that an additional $2 billion would be found to devote towards research in TB, and that included advancements of drugs and diagnostics. So 2 years on, we should be looking back and we should be discussing the extent to which that acceleration happened. And of course, we're not because of the intervention of COVID. And I don't think we need to repeat just how dramatic the implications for the fight against other diseases have been. They've been very serious indeed, and I think will be with us for some time. And there have been many reports that are showing the impacts around the world. I do, though, want just to pause to reflect on the fact that even if COVID had not intervened, we would still actually be off track. I'm afraid that there were already signs that governments weren't delivering the increased commitments and progress that they were meant to, and we had not succeeded to bend the curve as rapidly as we were going to need to if we were going to meet the Sustainable Development Goal of beating the disease by 2030. And let's just remember that we're now in 2020. This is D minus 10. We have 10 years to meet that goal. And we are, of course, now even more off target insofar as that's concerned. As Madhu Pai remarked to me a few months ago, if we had a mountain to climb in beating TB before, it's just become Everest. But before we depress ourselves, let's remind ourselves that Everest has been scaled and is regularly scaled, and that this is not an impossible feat. TB was very nearly beaten once before. Other epidemics have been beaten before, although of course we know that that isn't true. They've never finally been beaten without a vaccine, and we know that new tools will be absolutely essential to do so. And I think that it's possible only to be depressed about the impact of COVID, but we need to look also at what COVID has shown us. And Mitchell, you referred to this in your opening remarks about the power of science and how science can solve problems that look so dramatic and serious. And the very rapid development of vaccines, of rapid testing, of better drugs to fight COVID has demonstrated to politicians and the world that it is science which is so important. This is a reminder, I think, to us all when it comes to ensuring our health and security. And that, I think, is the flip side of the coin, that COVID has also shown us what is possible. It's shown us, though, the central importance of investment, the enormous public and private investment that's been made around the world to beat the disease has totally outstripped anything that we've seen in tuberculosis. And of course, it has shown us the continuing, the enduring importance of political leadership. Politicians are, of course, focused on COVID above everything else, particularly in those countries that are most seriously affected. And it is the absence of that investment and that political leadership that has so bedeviled the fight against tuberculosis over the last few years. But what has happened is that COVID has put global health security back on the agenda of political leaders, or perhaps on it for the first time. We have to admit that health security was not as high up on the agenda as it should have been. To be fair, leaders were talking about antimicrobial resistance. They had focused on the threat from that. There were preparations in place in many countries to deal with pandemics, but not, it appears, of the one that finally materialized. I think we can agree that there were some countries that were more focused on COVID than others because of the experience that they'd had with other viruses that had appeared on the scene, which had threatened them, and that hadn't reached across the world. But it is now true that the world's leaders are focused on global health security. And that, I think, must be, if we can look on the bright side from the advent of a new disease, which is exacting such a toll, something that potentially can help us in arguing for the fight against TB. But we have to accept that these countries have expended huge sums of money in order to support their populations at a time when lockdown measures have impacted their economies very seriously. And as a consequence, that treasuries are emptying. Countries are ramping up enormous amounts of spending and borrowing. And there are already worrying signs that major countries are starting to think again about spending commitments which they have made going forward. It was noticeable, for instance, that in the UK this week, for the first time, there was a suggestion of a challenge to the amount of money which the UK, above almost every other country, spends towards aid, the 0.7% GNI target, which is fixed in our law but which was suggested could not be met because of the impact of COVID on our finances. And when it comes to things like investment in R&D, when it comes to the things like the replenishment of the global funds in the future, it was always a battle for us to persuade the Western governments, the wealthier governments, that they should be devoting resources to this. It's going to be even more of a battle now. But in the end, it will come down to leadership. The leadership which we expect from our leaders in every country to ensure that we are safe, their greater understanding of the importance of health security, of the importance of universal healthcare systems, of protecting their populations against transmissible and other diseases. It will come from the leadership of parliamentarians who are urging those changes, and the Global TB Caucus will do everything we can to continue to mobilize that. But it will also come from the leadership of civil society and industry, where we need to speak with a collective voice to say that there must continue to be pressure to increase spending on R&D when it comes to tuberculosis, which remains the world's deadliest disease, the world's biggest killer. That shortfall still exists, and there still is a funding gap. There are still far too many countries that are not spending the requisite share of their national income on R&D, and the sums involved to do so are relatively small. If I could just say this in conclusion, even before COVID, I would have been arguing that there is a need to ensure greater coordination of international R&D effort. I don't think that coordination is strong enough. I don't think we have sufficient accountability to show where countries, not just the wealthier donor countries, but the middle income countries too, are not spending their fair share when it comes to research and development in TB. And we have to have that accountability, that visibility of what countries are spending. And I think we also need to ensure better coordination of R&D effort around the world. I'd like to conclude by thanking you all for everything that you're doing to support this fight, to thank the TB Alliance for its vital work, and to urge that even as we face these dark days of COVID and the terrible impact it's had, the humanitarian impact, of course, but also the further knock-on impact on tuberculosis and the further humanitarian impact there, even as we face these dark days, let us look on the bright side. Global health security really is on the political agenda now. We have to make that work for us. We have to demand that there is leadership. We have to continue to give TB a voice. And I pledge that I'll do everything I can, and the TB Caucus will do everything we can to continue to make it our mission to end TB as was promised, both in the original Sustainable Development Goals and at that high-level meeting 2 years ago. It's our duty to do that, and we're determined to do so. Thank you very much.
Lord Herbert, thank you so very, very much. Sobering on so many levels, but also incredibly inspiring to hear the commitment and the leadership. As you say, global health security has not been on many leaders' agendas, and now it is, and now we need to make best use of it. So thank you so much for being part of this, and we look forward to your continued leadership. I'm going to turn it over to Mel Spiegelman in just a moment. I do want to just say we want questions throughout the conversation. I want to encourage people on the Zoom feature, you'll see at the bottom, hopefully, the Q&A feature. Please put questions there as we go. We're going to get to as many of them as we can in the panel discussion, but feel free to begin to put them in from this point forward as Mel kicks off to give us a state of the TB Alliance.
Thank you. I hope
we hear you, Mel. It's perfect.
Great. Okay. Mitchell, thank you so much. And Nick, I don't know how to thank you enough. And certainly for today's talk, but really especially for the unbelievably longstanding dedicated commitment that you've made to TB and the groundbreaking work that you've done with the Global TB Caucus. Eternally indebted to you from, I think, the entire TB community. COVID-19 has been has played such a dominant part of in our lives this year that not infrequently we lose the perspective on the other concomitant challenges we face, especially those like TB that have been exacerbated by COVID-19. However, what I think one of the messages that we want to send today is that in spite of all the COVID-19 induced setbacks, significant progress has also been made in the TB world. If you can go to the next slide. But let me first start, as this is the 20th year anniversary of the founding of the TB Alliance, and as hard as that may be to believe, it seems appropriate to look back not only over the past year, but really over the past 2 decades. And to a great extent, the founding of the Alliance back in the year 2000 represented a dream, or really a vision, of what was needed to move the field of TB therapeutics away from what at that point really had become a forgotten wasteland with decades of inactivity. And that the challenges back then were enormous would be an understatement at best. For the Alliance specifically, we started in 2000 with 1 employee in a back office of the Rockefeller Foundation in New York City. That was followed in relatively short order by the 9/11 attack in the year 2001. At that time, the TB Alliance office was in Lower Manhattan near the World Trade Center and was not accessible for quite a while. It's somewhat ironic that today, almost 2 decades later, we again cannot go into the office because of a different adversary, but one that we will also overcome. If we specifically look back now at the evolution of new TB therapies for just a minute, and we focus on the year around 2000, progress had basically come to a screeching halt going back 30 to 40 years earlier. But now, if we look at the past 20 years, 3 novel drugs have been approved by at least 1 stringent regulatory authority. We now have a regimen that can treat the most resistant forms of TB in 6 months with 3 oral drugs. And as recently as the announcement last month by the TBTC and the ACTG at the union meeting, a regimen to treat drug-sensitive TB in 4 months. When we consider the lack of anywhere near adequate resources for the field of TB R&D, as Nick so greatly put it, that's unbelievable progress. And so let me just thank you, so many of the participants on the call today, for your dedication and hard work, because without your dedication and hard work, this sort of progress over the past decade or 2 would just not have been possible. So let me now, though, focus on the work of the Alliance specifically, and focus a little bit on the past year's accomplishments and progress. As I believe most of you know by now, the NIX-TB regimen of the 3-drug combination of bedaquiline, pertomid, and linezolid, BPAL, was approved by the FDA in August of last year, and by the EMA and in India in 2020. The trial of NIX-TB, which was published in March in the New England Journal of Medicine this year, showed a 90% cure rate in patients who had either XDR-TB or treatment intolerant or non-responsive MDR-TB, which, when one looks at that in the context of what was happening prior to the start of the NIX-TB study, it's an unbelievable improvement. Now, the treatment regimen, as I think all of you hopefully know by now, consists of 3 orally administered drugs, which was given to virtually all patients for 6 months only. So clearly, the potential benefits to patients, to their families, to the healthcare systems of having this type of a novel regimen are enormous. But I think one of the most important lessons of the NICS-TB trial and results that is not often viewed is the conceptual leap, that we now had evidence that the most highly resistant forms of TB do not require any longer treatment or more drugs than the easiest form of TB, which is drug-sensitive TB, to treat. The goal is we just need to find the right drugs and, more correctly, the right regimens. So to me, the take-home lesson is we can today realistically set our sights on extremely aggressive and bold goals, much more so than we could have envisioned a couple of years ago in the field of TB therapeutics. But we also need to be careful not to be lulled into a false sense of complacency that after we finish the first part of the process, which really is the discovery and the development of new drugs and regimens, because that is only the first part of the process, that there is at least an equally difficult challenge to steer through the processes of setting policy and guidelines, ensuring global access for all patients around the world, and that obviously includes ensuring the availability of the products and the affordability of the products. So that, to that end, let me now, of assuring that the results of the NICS-TB trial would carry through to save lives and benefits to patients, to their families, to the healthcare systems. We, in the past year, along with so many partners, have invested an enormous amount of effort to make that happen. And while our global commercial partner, Mylan, and now known, I think, as Viatris, although I may not be pronouncing that correctly, Mylan was engaged, Viatris was engaged in 2019, but two other commercial partners, McLeod's and Hongxi, have been brought on board this year. Pretomanid is now available for 150 low and middle income countries through the GDF, another great partnership. The WHO has recommended the BPAL regimen to be studied under operational research conditions. Viatris launched a named access program for all countries in which Pretomanid is not yet approved. So one can now actually, for individual patients, get Pretomanid and the BPAL regimen in any country around the world on a named patient access basis. A clinical access program is under review in South Africa, hopefully to be approved very shortly. And as Eugene will describe in more detail later, our Linezolid optimization trial called ZeNix completed enrollment with results expected very soon in the beginning of 2021. Also, with the WHO recommendation of using the BPAL regimen under operational research conditions, there's been a huge effort in getting these programs up and running globally. Through the Stop TB Partnerships TB Reach program, Ukraine and Tajikistan will implement programs we hope very shortly. Through the support of USAID, the Clinical Access Program is being planned and will hopefully be started in the not too distant future in South Africa. South Korea's development aid agency called KOICA has really stepped up and is helping fund a project to provide technical assistance for BPAL implementation in 7 countries, mostly in the Southeast Asian part and in the Middle Asian countries. EDCTP is also funding a project to promote all oral regimens for DRTB, and Viatris has submitted regulatory applications already in at least 14 countries for the approval of Pretomanid and the BPAL regimen. along with already submitting for WHO pre-qualification. And the plans are to submit in at least another 15 countries before the end of this year, within the next couple of months. So just to summarize in the brief time that we have, the work to ensure that the R&D advances that have been made truly come to fruition have really advanced significantly over the past year. And that especially is a tribute to all involved, because we have to realize that was done all in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think none of us can speak today about what's happening without a realization of how the COVID-19 pandemic affects everybody. And I think, as Nick has so eloquently pointed out, though, COVID-19 is taking a horrible toll on the progress that has been made in TB. But, I think the take-home message from all the setbacks in the fight against TB is, yes, it is horrible, but the real message is we need to redouble our efforts now to eradicate TB and be even more aggressive and bolder than we ever have been before in the goals we set moving forward. That's not only in terms of progress, but as Nick alluded to, in ensuring that the resources are there for progress to really happen in real time. On our part, just to bring everyone also up to date on what we at the TB Alliance have tried to contribute, some of the work that we have been doing to help in the battle against COVID-19, we specifically looked at the assets that we have within the organization to seek out wherever it was feasible to deploy our resources in the COVID-19 struggle. We really looked for areas where we could see potential synergy, for example, in the compound libraries we have, wherein there could be, based on the knowledge of the COVID-19 organism, that there could be therapeutic activity against SARS-CoV-2. And so we have screened some of those compounds. We have seen hits in that screening. And in conjunction with the partners noted on this slide, we are following up on those. And hopefully we can play a role in the primary assault against COVID-19 also. So let me just briefly summarize. We now have a proof of principle that we can treat the most highly resistant forms of active TB in a similar time frame with the same number of drugs with similar success rates as can be done with drug-sensitive TB. So our next goals are to find one regimen that can treat virtually all TB patients with that one regimen and simultaneously shorten the time to cure for everybody to perhaps 2 to 3 months. But now we need also to think even more boldly and to the next quantum leap after that, and to begin to explore ways that we can actually cure TB in timeframes similar to most bacterial infections, i.e. in the order of days to weeks. And I'd offer now that this is no more a pipe dream than the thought in the year 2000 that we could have made the advances, all of us together, that have been made over the past 10 to 20 years. So with that, let me now ask Eugene first, and then Nader. Eugene, who is our head of R&D, Nader, who is the Chief Scientific Officer at the TB Alliance, respectively, to present both what has been accomplished over the past year, but certainly, well, maybe more importantly, even than what we've accomplished over the past year, what do we hope to accomplish in the future towards the goals that I just discussed? Thank you all so much.
Hello, everybody. I hope this is working.
It is, Eugene. We hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mel. Let me start with the next slide, which is let's call it a bird's eye view of excuse me, our new drug pipeline. This is familiar to you in terms of its phases and represents new drugs that are use validated mechanisms as well as new targets and new mechanisms of action against tuberculosis. I think that what's remarkable, given the context of what was said previously, this pipeline looks a lot fuller than it did in years past, which is encouraging. The other notable feature is the number of partnerships that are involved in the prosecution of these assets, these compounds, the regimens, the trials, et cetera. It includes a large breadth of academic, industry, government, and other NGO partners, which are required in the collaborative effort to develop new TB drugs and new TB drug regimens, as Mel has pointed out. Next slide. So Mel mentioned that we have a number of trials ongoing. The year 2020 was very challenging from the standpoint of clinical trial work. We were fortunate in that sense, in that the COVID pandemic that led to stoppage all across the board happened after we had completed enrollment into all three of these trials, just barely, but we did. And the challenge for us was to maintain the integrity of the trial procedures as patients worked their way through the studies, but we have managed. I think challenging times evoke creativity, adaptability in all shape and form, and we have seen that in working with our investigators, patients, our staff, and local authorities. So we're grateful for that. But let me just give you a quick update on where we stand with these three important trials. Mel mentioned the ZeNix study. The ZeNix study has been completed finally, and that finality is reflected in the last all patients reaching their 2-year follow-up visit. So that's 2 years after the end of therapy, and we have found remarkably consistent and sustained response in relapse-free cure, which we will present shortly in a scientific venue, and we'll report on the long-term safety follow-up of this quite prolonged follow-up period in that cohort. The ZeNix study is, I think, depicted on the next slide, is a trial that looks at variable dosing of the Linezolid regimen in the BPAL regimen that was studied in NICS, as depicted on this slide. Some arms have shorter durations of Linezolid, and some have a lower dose, and some have, well, one each have both. This trial has completed enrollment. The last patients have reached their primary endpoint, which is 6 months following the end of therapy. And as Mel mentioned, we will be looking at this data early next year and reporting on it. The third trial I want to update you on is the Simplicity-B study, 008. This trial looks at a 4-drug regimen of bedaquiline, pretomanid, moxifloxacin, and pyrazinamide. And that regimen is actually studied in both drug-sensitive and drug-resistant patients. So a step in a way towards a universal regimen. The patients enrolled in the DS arm are randomized against the HRZE control regimen. This trial also has completed enrollment. Patients have completed the therapy phase, and we are nearing the point at which all patients will have completed the primary endpoint 6 months following the end of therapy, or actually 12 months following the initiation of therapy in this case. This study is being conducted in several countries across 4 continents. And again, as I mentioned, we've had a few logistical operational challenges related to COVID, but we've managed to keep the trial marching along. Next slide. So those are the 3 major pratominid studies. There's additional work going on, which I will update you quickly on. We are engaged in a pediatric development program as agreed to with the European Medicines Agency. This consists of a series of studies, which we are progressing through. We have developed a oral dispersible pediatric formulation at dose of 10 and 50 milligrams. We've conducted a bioavailability comparison of that pediatric formulation with the 200 milligram dosage form. And we are working with the Impact Network on the next step in this process, which is a single dose study of those pediatric formulations in children being treated with an MDR or XDR drug regimen, and expect that study to start sometime in 2021. Following that, we will do a definitive study in children with the formulation with pharmacokinetics worked out from the single dose study as well as PK modeling in children with XDR or non-responsive MDR using the BPAL regimen. We also, so that last pediatric study is contingent on the completion of the study shown below that, which is a male reproductive safety study. As you may know, we had a preclinical signal of an adverse effect of pratominid on testicular function in rodents, but not in non-human primates. We have further explored in clinical studies any evidence of an effect on the hormonal axis and have found none. Nonetheless, we are conducting a prospective study in men to assess reproductive function, and that study will start sometime in the next few months. Anecdotally, we have noted that men who have participated in pratominid studies, we're anecdotally aware of children and pregnancies born from their partners. And so we decided to be a little bit more systematic about collecting those anecdotes, and we'll conduct a so-called paternity survey across some of our clinical trials that have been where pratominid has been dosed for a substantial period of time. And that study should start hopefully by the end of the year. Next slide. So this is a slide actually not of clinical data or clinical trials, but of mouse data. And so it's kind of a back to the future slide in the sense that data from this mouse experiment is an important indicator of the direction we hope to pursue in the near future with our next generation drugs and regimens. And what's shown here are the regimens that were used in this experiment in the left-hand column, representing bedaquiline or its second generation, next generation iterations that we are developing, 587 and 876, combined with pratominid and then the O represents an improved oxazolidinone that hopefully will not have the toxicity of linezolid. That's a compound that is in phase 1, TBI-223. And so what the numbers in the table show are the numbers of mice relapsing after different periods of treatment, indicated in that top row. And what this experiment indicates is that replacing bedaquiline with one of the second generation diauroquinolines and treating for as short as 6 weeks, we can reach a point where none of the mice have relapsed after a 12-week observation period, which is noticeably and substantially improved over the outcome when BPAL is used. So this indicates that we are very optimistic about the ability to shorten our treatment regimens, treatment durations with next generation compounds. And we will be moving forward with these compounds in clinical trials in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. So Mel mentioned this as well. Our main focus is clearly the mycobacterium known as tuberculosis. There are other pathogenic mycobacteria called NTMs. Some of these are problematic in diseases of chronic lung diseases such as cystic fibrosis and COPD. And we have established a collaboration with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and Johns Hopkins University to try to leverage some of our compounds and expertise and experience in the tuberculosis field against some of these NTMs. So I just wanted to mention that. And I'm going to now turn it over to Nader to describe another aspect of what we see in the future with the eventual goal of achieving shorter and shorter regimens with high degrees of safety and efficacy towards our ultimate goal of eradicating tuberculosis. So Nader is the Chief Scientific Officer at the TB Alliance. Over to you.
Thank you, Eugene. And thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to present our plans and thoughts on how we can progress into the future. We can go to the next slide, please. So as Mel mentioned, this is the 20th anniversary of TB Alliance, and it's a good time to reflect a little bit of how we started and what we've done over the last decade and where really we should be going and where we think we should be going and we are going. The first decade was really establishment of the PDP model and also to really start putting together a very large portfolio of projects, over 30 projects that could deliver clinical candidates and novel compounds. The last decade really was the decade that we proved the concept of regimen development with novel compounds. And BPAL regimen, certainly approved last year, was the first. And we hope that would be many other ones to come based on that strategy. However, we believe that we can't stop here and we can't stop being creative about how to improve the treatment experience for TB patients. And today, we'd like to give you our plans and our thoughts on new approaches that, especially adapting from what we are learning from other diseases. And as you can see from the title, especially the impact of immune modulation and the success that it's had in diseases such as cancer. We'll go to the next slide, please. So how would this change things? Well, today we have available treatments for all TB patients in the range of 6 months or more. But our preclinical models, as Eugene showed you earlier, really points us in the direction that a path to a 3 months or less regimen is a distinct possibility. And that really would be a significant advancement in the treatment of TB for patients. However, we believe that while certain immunotherapy trials have gone on, we believe that today the advances that have been made in the understanding of immune modulation, as well as the biology of TB itself, really offers a real promise to boost the efficacy of TB regimens and achieving potentially the really aggressive and aspirational goals of being able to eradicate TB in a matter of days. And we're now actively engaged in building out our research landscape in TB immunotherapy and hope to be able to deliver novel compounds as well to be able to achieve such goal. If you go to the next slide, please. So we have now established a number of collaborations, and our approach to immunotherapy is also not necessarily just to be opportunistic about taking whatever is available from the literature, but we're also complementing it and really coordinating it with an artificial intelligence component. And we've established a collaboration today with a company called Inveni AI. It's an AI-driven analysis that we've performed with them on all immunomodulatory pathways and targets that may have the greatest impact on bacterial clearance. And these targets and pathways potentially have either clinical or research compounds available. So it would be a really good start for us to test out some hypotheses on how immune therapy could accelerate the clearance of the bacterium. And our next step is with an advisory group to start evaluating what we've learned from this exercise and also selecting a specific number of projects to be able to then demonstrate and do a proof of concept study in our relapse mouse model, and on top of either our favorite or most advanced regimen that of the kind that Eugene showed, and also the standard of care. And artificial intelligence is really a key component here because it not only impacts the discovery of novel ways of addressing the eradication of TB through immunotherapy, but it also offers another possibility that we are exploring and will be exploring, is the opportunity to be able to acquire and identify lead compounds in the variety of projects that we are identifying now, to be able to speed the process, because we also need at the same time think about how we can accelerate the discovery of novel compounds, whether it be an antibiotic or an immunotherapy as well. So we're combining the artificial intelligence component with a company called ZeNix AI that uses the Google artificial intelligence platform with a large scale screening approach, which is known as DNA encoded library. And we believe this would lead to identifying compounds with quite advanced properties and therefore hopefully accelerate what we can achieve in discovering novel compounds. If we go to the next slide, please. So as we build on these partnerships, we see the potential of significantly improving over today's 6 months therapy, including the most recent results from TBTC and ACTG, which are quite encouraging in resulting in a 4 months therapy. And as we move forward with a universal regimen for all novel drugs, as we discussed earlier, we do see a pathway to the patient's experience lasting maybe 3 months or less. And hopefully by pairing all of these novel regimens with an appropriate immunotherapy or an immune modulator, we envisage a world that, which the time it takes to cure the TB may be in days or a couple of weeks. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to working with our stakeholders to make this vision a reality. Thank you.
Great. Nader, Eugene, and Mel, thank you so much for providing all of that background. It is really amazing, even in the midst of COVID, to see the robust amount of activity that the Alliance has been driving, and really excited. And it prompted a lot of great questions that have already begun to come in. I want to encourage people to continue to send them in. We're going to go as quickly as we can to get to as many as we can. And one thing we want to highlight too is to be sure that these conversations won't end today. And it won't wait until a year from now, and hopefully we will be together at the next union meeting for the Stakeholder Association. We're really going to look to make sure that there is ongoing communication as we take this work forward together. I am going to ask the three panelists to please turn on your cameras if you can. I know, Bangiswa, you may have some challenges there with bandwidth, and we understand, but I am delighted to welcome three individuals who are working in different aspects of the real, or I don't want to say the real world as if the TB Alliance and the work that Mel, Eugene, and Nader described isn't real, but when it gets down into clinical trials, and most particularly into the communities and to the people that this is all meant to serve, is where we're going to go next. And I'm delighted to welcome three people. Francesca Conradi from the WITS Health Consortium in South Africa, who, as many of you know, is a leading TB researcher in South Africa and has been quite involved in some of the trials you just heard about. In addition, Nestani Tukvadze from the National Center for TB and Lung Disease in Tbilisi, Georgia, also involved in a number of research activities. And Bongiswa Madaka, an XDR TB survivor who was actually a participant in the ZeNix TB trial. No matter what we see from product developers and research, without trial participants, we won't get new innovation, new drugs, new vaccines, new anything. Trial participants really are the heart and soul of what makes science move forward. And so, Bongiswa, we're so happy that you're here as well. I am going to feed in some of these questions that have already come in. And perhaps I may just start with you, Francesca, if I may. As the global PI for the ZeNix TB trial, I think we've heard a lot over the last year, and a lot of excitement just before the last Stakeholder Association when when Pertomanid was approved. But what's the possible impact of a regimen like BPAL in a population in South Africa, with really the epicenter so much of TB and of HIV? But what's a new innovation like BPAL mean in terms of potential impact? And have you seen it already, and what's to come?
So the impact is that prior to the advent of BPAL as a regimen, patients with XDR TB were committed to treatment for a minimum of 18 months. It's difficult to retain people in care under those circumstances. And when COVID came along, it made it even worse, because we didn't want our TB patients to be on public transport where they could potentially acquire COVID. So the concept of a short all-oral regimen for the most difficult to treat form of TB in the future will make a massive difference. And it's really taught us a lot of lessons about being able to effectively treat our patients in a shorter period of time.
Fantastic. And I was going to actually turn to Bongiswa next, as someone who's been on the regimen. I think we're reconnecting her now, so I don't know if her audio is on. So maybe we'll come back to Bongiswa to pick up on that. But Nastani, I wonder if I can ask you to describe a bit, sitting in Georgia where your TB hospital has also had to deal with the COVID response. And as I think we've all said from the beginning of the call with Lord Herbert, COVID is changing so many things about our work and opportunities. And I wonder if you can describe the impact, particularly on TB patients, TB programs, and on healthcare workers, and how you're managing that.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. I represent the National Center for TB and Lung Diseases, which is the main referral center for TB diagnostic and treatment in the country. And the country population is small, 3.8 million, and we're the medium TB burden country, which means that most of these patients are coming to our center. So when the pandemic started, we were asked to transform to the COVID clinic, which definitely influenced all the flow we previously had. And being a physician, I can say that managing TB cases, it's really complex. And with the long treatment duration, need of managing adverse events, need of having directly observed treatment, it's really difficult and becomes more difficult when you have such an uncertain times as COVID-19 pandemic we see now. So the influence has been huge. First of all, we see the shortage of the healthcare staff because they now need to deal with both different diseases. The market is not bad nowadays, but in the beginning there was a huge shortage in the PPE, and we saw that healthcare workers have been infected, and that was an additional burden in the shortage of the healthcare staff. What we also see, our TB patients got COVID, and we have implemented this dual screening, but still we see they got infected. The positivity rate is 0.3% right now, but as we see, the trend is towards increasing, and we don't know much about this new disease, and in combination with TB, it's even more frightening. So we don't know what will be the long-term outcomes, right? So we see this part then. And one additional thing is probably to mention, and discussing it with the colleagues in the region, it's a general trend that mostly the referrals have been decreased, and we understand that if there is no quick referral, then there is no early diagnostics, and these people will be coming with more severe disease. And hopefully we can soon deal with COVID and soon deal with better and easier ways of TB case management as well.
Great, thank you. I wonder, maybe Francesca and Nastani both, there was a question that came in that I think is really an important one about any potential role of TB medications that somehow might have benefit and effect against COVID-19. And is there a possibility of any host immunity in TB patients? And I know that, for example, one of the TB vaccines actually being studied even for potential benefit against COVID. I wonder if either of you have a way to describe that for stakeholders on the call.
So at this stage, I don't think that we have any real evidence that any TB drug has an effect on, has any real effect on TB. What I've been quite surprised at is that South Africa has an extraordinarily high burden of TB. We diagnose about 350,000 cases, and one of the highest incidence rates in the world for a number of complicated reasons. And we were prepared for an onslaught of really ill TB patients presenting with COVID and a high mortality. And what was quite surprising is that TB does confer an increase in mortality. That's not a surprise. TB is a pulmonary disease. And obviously, the later you diagnose a pulmonary disease and the more damage there is, the worse any other respiratory illness is going to be. But it only confers a very low increase in mortality, only two times the increase in mortality, unlike being older. even HIV doesn't have that profound an effect, but being older, being overweight, being an uncontrolled diabetic has a much more profound effect on mortality. I think in the times to come, we'll be able to unpick what this actually was and why we saw such a low rate of mortality. And maybe it is the TB drugs, maybe it's the immune response. All I know is that there are going to be students writing PhDs on this for the next 40 years.
I bet, these more questions than ever before in science and answers to come in the years to come. Nastani, did you want to add anything on that as well?
I will just mention about the immunity and the ecological studies we have seen published in recent months that BCG might have some impact in the immunity against COVID-19. We all understand as researchers that ecological studies are not good enough for the inference, but they're good enough at least to see the association. So as Francesca mentioned, there will be a couple of more years that PhD students and researchers will be working on that to answer that question, but the association is definitely there. So.
Great, thanks. And I think Bongi is now off again. Let me just check to see. Bongi, so you're not there. Okay. I think we're going to keep trying because I do have some questions for her that have built up. One though, which is also for her, and we'll come back to her hopefully when she's able to join. But in terms of Mel, Nader, and Eugene all described a very rich amount of potential research activities and opportunities. I wonder if either of you might want to comment on disruptions in research that have happened, and on the flip side, are there innovations in the work you've been able to do in the midst of COVID where you've been able to kind of pivot or adopt new innovative approaches to community engagement, particularly around the trials and recruitment in those trials in the midst of COVID? I'll let either one of you jump in.
Yeah.
Nastani, do you want to start?
So let me just start, but then ask Nader to kick in a little bit. And also Francesca, because clearly at every stage along the quote value chain, adjustments and innovation has had to be made. And maybe Nader can say a few words. When labs were shut down in one part of the world, but they were open in another part of the world, because of the multiple partnerships, we were able to transfer from one lab to another to continue the work. And I'll ask Nader to say a couple of words on that because he's the one who's closest to it. And perhaps Francesca, in terms of the changes that were made, we were fortunate, frankly, as the TB Alliance, because we didn't have any large studies that were actively accruing patients at the time that COVID hit, but clearly the patients had to be followed up. And that put a real burden on the sites to follow up patients for all the reasons. And maybe Francesca could actually say a couple of words about how that was handled. So maybe Nader first and then Francesca to answer those.
Yeah, I can certainly give you a little bit of an update about that. I mean, certainly as it started in China, we do some activities in China. And when China locked down, basically, we did incur some delays, especially in being able to generate novel compounds. And as it progressed, and we got hit in the US as well, a number of collaborators that we have had to shut down their labs, including our collaborator Eric Nuremberg at Johns Hopkins, where we do all of our relapse models, and Scott Franzblau at UIC, where we do a lot of our in vitro biology as well. And certainly also as the labs were allowed to go back in or to open up, there was also a competition, of course, between running experiments for TB and also being able to run experiments of COVID. So I would say there was quite a few months of delay overall that we incurred in the research group.
Francesca, it'd be helpful, it'd be great to hear what might have been happening or is happening on the ground, particularly in terms of the work with communities in the midst of all of this.
So when we enroll patients onto clinical trials or are just responsible for their clinical care, we're looking at two things, which is safety and efficacy. So is the medicine that I'm giving this patient doing them any harm, and is it doing them any good? And then obviously on a clinical trial, we want to establish that very tightly. We had a number of patients in follow-up who they'd already finished their treatment, but we had to keep close telephonic contact with them to make sure that they had no symptoms of a relapse, in which case we would bring them in. But we were also very cognizant of the fact is that we didn't want to have any unnecessary visits to a healthcare system. Because to get into a healthcare system for the vast majority of South Africans means getting onto public transport. That's dangerous from a COVID point of view. So we had to work out novel ways to make sure that we hadn't missed anything, that we didn't miss an adverse event, and we were still measuring for efficacy. Things have settled down, and now public transport's pretty much back to its normal. But it taught us a lot of powerful lessons about keeping in virtual contact with our patient stroke participants.
No, that's great. And I'm delighted virtually. We do have, it looks like, Bongiswa, you're back. I'm so happy to see you, and I hope the connection stays. And as you just heard Francesca describing, I was asking, just as you rejoined, innovations or the need to think very differently about engaging with communities in the midst of COVID, and wonder if you could maybe speak to that. But also, we were talking earlier, I don't know if you were on, about the BPAL regimen and the idea of a shorter regimen. And we hear about it described in the science. I think we'd all love to hear about it described from someone who's actually benefiting from that shorter regimen. And if you can just describe what that has meant for you and how you're managing it all in the midst of COVID as well.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Michelle. Yeah, I come from a disadvantaged community. So during this time of COVID, people need knowledge to know what they are dealing with. To me, I think people should be taught about TB before they are taught about COVID, because COVID is similar to TB. If people knew very well what is TB, if people were taught before COVID came how TB is spread, I think we will be dealing with yes, COVID is big, but it wouldn't be this big. We need campaigns, but due to the COVID, we should do social distancing and stuff. We can't do that, but I feel there is a need for campaigns like this. I'm an ex-patient of ZeNix, and I was very lucky to be discovered them, because they discovered me. I didn't know about them. So I was very lucky to know them, because they made my life easier, because I took my treatment for a shorter term than I was supposed to. So when I got disturbed due to network at some points, but I saw a rough graph of the coming of other treatments. I saw a 7 to 10 days. I was like, wow, this would be good. Yes, my 6 months was good, but a shorter term while taking a treatment will always be a good thing. So
Bongiswa, oh, I think you might have froze.
Thank you for such treatment and on.
Great, thank you, and so grateful for your input. And we got it just until the end when you froze, but so helpful to hear. I wonder, you talked about 6 months was better, and even the idea of even getting shorter is good. But I wonder, and I guess this is for all three of you, and also Mel, if you want, a question had come in about what are some of the roadblocks or barriers to BPAL. We just heard from Bongiswa that this is a really important step forward with the shorter regimen, but what's standing in the way of making that the standard? And wonder if any of you, whether Francesco or Nastani from program delivery at the country level, or Mel from the TB Alliance perspective.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah. Okay. Let me start. Sorry, I'm trying to bring. Yeah. Number one is the push that we need to get a fair amount of operational research on the groundwork in the countries to show that this is not just a phenomenon of a clinical trial, but this is this works in practice. So that's why the importance that I alluded to with all the operational research, and also then the other aspect of it, because clearly, and Francesca can, better even address this from the point of view of on the ground, using Linezolid as a drug for TB is difficult. It has side effects that need to be monitored, and it puts a strain on any healthcare system, physicians, et cetera, and patients, obviously. And that's why the importance of the ZeNix trial, for example, to see if we can make that Linezolid risk benefit even much better than what it is now. So clearly reducing the amount of care in a way, or oversight that has to go into the treatment, even if it's only 6 months, is an important component. And then when we get to the implementation, I think we've seen through the implementation of prior approved drugs, so to speak, with bedaquiline, delamanid, et cetera, there just are a lot of practical barriers in getting healthcare systems to switch. It does not happen easily. It requires a huge amount of effort. It requires a lot of money for educational purposes. Supply chains have to be changed. I could go on and on. And that's another area that we really, I think, need to work on, because hopefully, as opposed to what I alluded to, that we see an innovation every 30 or 40 years, we will hopefully be seeing innovations, and whether it's in the field of therapeutics, diagnostics, vaccines, it's all in the same ballpark, that we need to make change very user-friendly in these systems around the world, which have a very a lack of a lot of resources to change. So I think all of those are the challenges, but clearly I'll welcome Francesca and others' comments.
I often compare the TB program to the Titanic, and all of us know how that ended. It was a slow-moving ship and it sunk. And I think that the part of the slowness of the change in the TB world is that for a long time, the status quo was okay. A 6-month treatment for the vast majority of our patients with a high success rate, that was all right. With the advent or the increase in the number of cases of drug-resistant TB, and also with the realization that probably 6 months is too much for a whole lot of people, might be too little for some. And so the change in a national TB program, first of all, we have to get innovative leaders of national TB programs who will accept the fact that the gene expert, I mean, that was a big fight to get the gene expert accepted as a method of diagnostics. And people were still clinging to sneers, and sometimes they still are. And to change anything requires not only research and development, but political commitment. We've seen political commitment occurring with COVID. We're not going to talk about which country's done what, because that's too much detail. But when the government can stand up and change or suggest ways to improve public health, things can change. And political commitment is something that we need to be driving a lot. And it's great to see members of our community and the fantastic work that the TB Alliance does amongst our community to change the slowness of the moving of the change in TB.
So important. And I'm sorry that Lord Herbert's off, because a question had come in early on, which I was going to ask a number of you about how to work sometimes with governments that are resistant to change, are blocking information. A related question about how to bring in NGOs and community groups that might work outside, particularly in countries where governments are resisting that. And I wonder, I know, Nastani, I saw you just turning your microphone on. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, and maybe Bongiswa as well.
I will not be probably a very good person to respond on that. We don't see in our experience, at least in the country, the resistance.
Sorry?
And it's quite supportive politically. Maybe some others. But...
Great. Bongiswa, is that? Please do come in. Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Bongiswa.
Okay. What was the question, Mr. Musa?
Oh, I was asked. I'm afraid.
Can you repeat for me?
You're coming in and out of it. We were talking about the role of community groups, and particularly in places where countries either aren't going fast enough, as Francesca described, or are resistant, and wondered if you had thoughts on that, but I don't know if you heard that. All right. I will say, and apologies, and I think anyone who's been on Zoom in the last 9 months, and some of you have been on Zoom constantly for 9 months, these things happen. We are going to make a point of...
I got you now.
Oh, there you are.
I always had such thoughts ever since I was diagnosed with XDR-TB.
We're going to organize, and there's obviously a lot of follow-up to come from this call. I think what we're going to do is organize a call, Bongiswa, with you, so we can actually record your
yes,
perspective. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I've had thoughts of the government should do more. They should do more.
So we will make sure to capture this in a recording with you, Bongiswa, and share it, I think, as a one of the links as a follow-up to this. In addition, we're going to have lots of additional questions that we haven't had time for. Maybe what we'll do is just really quickly, I'll ask, because I have one last question, which I think may go back a bit to Mel anyway, but I wonder maybe, Nistani and Francesca, if there's any closing thoughts either of you might have as we think about looking forward into 2021, when this year will be behind us sooner, we hope, than not. And just to give a sense of what you're hopeful for and excited about with respect to TB research, TB programs in the year ahead, and to really give us a sense of what we should be looking forward to and engaging with.
Yes, thank you. Just to echo the last question, I think this is the question to the communities, and I think this is the area where the communities can step forward and really speak to the governments and try to engage them. And we as researchers and physicians will be always supporting them. As for the expectations for 2021, we've seen probably the biggest progress in TB drug or diagnostic or other areas, development pipelines in this last decade, and this is really amazing from where we got to all these developments. But we also anticipate that it's not quite enough, and with these complexities, TB case management takes additional burdens to the systems, like COVID-19 is almost becoming impossible to handle. So we need shorter, we need less side effects from the drugs, so we need best point of care tests. So we definitely need more research. And the good thing is what we have seen in the response of COVID-19, that consolidated efforts can really bring miracles in the research world. So we could not believe that 1 year, less than 1 year, could be something enough for so much development. So I think we can learn from this and move forward.
Great, thank you so much. Francesca, any last thoughts?
So I think that...
Oh.
Okay, now I've managed to unmute and to put my camera on.
Perfect.
Good start. think this was my first rodeo. So I think that TB was able to teach the COVID response quite a bit. The first one, and we chatted about it yesterday, is TBologists know about contact tracing. And I think that we're able to confer that knowledge to a COVID response. And the second is that we have made it much more normal to be using personal protective equipment, both in hospitals. I've never understood why a person would go to hospital without a mask on, but also in the communities in general. And I hope that will continue and will make an impact in the longer term on TB incidence and prevalence.
Francesca, thank you for that. And actually, Bongiswa had said something earlier in a different call about mask wearing, that it's not new for her in COVID. And I think it's to your point. TB does have so much to teach the COVID response. And at the same time, how we can't leave the TB response behind. If we succeed against COVID, but have let TB resurge, we have not had a net gain in global health. And so we've got to be able to do both of those things and many other things at the same time. I'm so sorry, Bongiswa, that we didn't get to hear more from you. And again, we'll send a recording, I think, of a conversation with you that we'll send out to the Stakeholder Association. Other questions that didn't get asked or answered on this call, we're going to commit to trying to get those back out. I do want to just close and thank everybody and thank the TB Alliance and want to thank Stephanie and Thomas especially for helping pull all of this together. There was a great comment actually from Ezio, a leading advocate, about a comment about the contribution of communities from the TB world who've actually been influencing positively the COVID-19 emergency response. And in fact, the experience in Brazil where community organizations really helped with the Simplicity TB study and then the COVID response. And it relates to a question, Mel, maybe I'll leave with you to close us out. A great question from someone saying, how can the TB Alliance work with TB and HIV advocacy organizations to be part of trials and programs going forward globally, and particularly in countries perhaps where governments might block efforts? Something obviously that the Stakeholder Association strives to support the Alliance in doing, but would be delighted to get your comments on that question and then any final thoughts from you.
I'm sorry, who was that question?
Oh, someone asked how the TB Alliance can work with TB and HIV advocacy organizations. And I just thought you might want to have a closing thought about the TB Alliance and the work ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Let me try. Yeah. So first, let me just thank Bongiswa, Francesca, Nestani, Nick, all the contributor, Mitch, obviously you, but you're sort of a semi-member of the family in a sense. But let me thank everybody for their contribution to this session, number one. Number two, I think the question that you just asked really goes to the heart of the future of what we need to strive for. My sense is that we have to look at what is going to emerge post-COVID-19, because I do think, especially with the recent advances in at least two of the major vaccine trials, that I am so hopeful, maybe praying that COVID-19 can be put in the rearview mirror in the not too distant future. But we collectively, and whether that's working with TB, HIV communities, whether it's working with other neglected diseases, we now have to formulate a really new mode of working together to truly take advantage of what I think are the opportunities that now will arise. As Nick alluded to, the world has seen when everybody gets together, what can be accomplished in record-breaking time. The world, I think, now further appreciates what it means when we put out a statistic that 1.4 million people die every year of TB. We're just approaching that with COVID-19, and it's a tragedy. It's an unbelievable tragedy, but it's a tragedy that's been going on for decades, year in and year out in TB. So we have, I think, a setting that is ripe for being able to push this field forward. The only way that we can do that is by banding together even more strongly and more coherently than we've ever done before. And I think that is a sine qua non of what we have to do, whether with all the different constituencies, certainly with civil society as a core and community-based activism as a core component of that. And obviously also in the research and development field, et cetera, by putting governments together with each other for peer pressure, a whole variety of initiatives that we really need now to focus on.
Great, Mel, fantastic way to end, and thank you so much. A clarion call. Again, we look forward to staying in touch. We said last year in India, we really were looking to ensure that the Stakeholder Association was able to engage and communicate more frequently. This has been a ridiculously odd year, and we are going to recommit on this call to do that again and to really follow up on all that Mel said. Thank you, everybody. And also, again, Bongiswa, Nestani, Francesca, Mel, Nader, and Eugene. Thank you all. And Nick Herbert, who had to leave a little early. But stay safe, stay well. And perhaps most importantly, although that's really important, staying safe and well, do stay in touch. Let Stephanie and me know what more we can be doing. And we will keep these conversations going and really enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to all.